Welcome back to r/neighbors from hell, where people share stories about their crazy neighbors, and if you are new to my channel, please don't forget to subscribe to join our amazing community, and without any further ado, let's dive right into the stories. The first one is titled "Neighbor blocked access to my garage with an illegal fence and stole a piece of my property." I am a single woman who purchased an adorable, quaint home for my single self a few years ago. I had always been neighborly and nice to those around me, as all of our homes were very close together. I felt that keeping things cordial was always the best thing to do with those who lived around you. But that does not mean that every neighbor has the same idea as me, meaning being a douchebag for no reason is totally fine. When I first purchased the home, there was a very small iron fence that seemed to be indicating the property division between my home and my neighbor to the east. For the first year that I lived there, everything was good and there was never an issue, but then my mother became sick and required more of my time and attention than usual. This meant that I was not as thorough about my yard upkeep, especially in the back. I would still keep the grass cut, but the bushes and other small shrubs that were on the eastern side of my garage grew a little out of hand. It was never my intention to allow for the bushes to become unsightly, but I was simply distracted for several weeks during the spring and summer. I knew that my neighbor who was adjacent to that side of my property would be a stickler about the overgrown shrubs, so I made sure to send him desserts and other nice things to try and make up for it. Only, he never really cared for my gifts and asked me when I was going to take care of the backyard, to which I responded, "I'm doing my best." Well, as you can imagine, that did not please him much. About a week later, he started the process of building a fence, a big one at that, around 10 feet. I knew that it was to spite me because he had lived here a long time and never put up a big-ass privacy fence until now. I was not sure how to approach the matter and just decided that if he wanted to be angry and extreme, that he could. That is until I realized that he had taken part of my property when he built the fence and even blocked off the side door access to my own garage. I should probably explain the way that our neighborhood is set up so that you can get a good idea of what is going on. All of the homes are smaller and built close together. It is pretty typical for most property edges to be touching, and sometimes neighbors share very small portions of a driveway or an alley to get to a garage. These easements between properties are pretty common here. However, what my neighbor has done is in no way, shape or form legal, but I'll admit that I was a little worried since I don't know too much about property laws. That is when I decided that I probably should look into finding an attorney who can help me. Not having access to the side of my garage or the small portion that is blocked by his fence post was very frustrating and clearly inconvenient. Even though I was upset, I'm not the type of person to go out of my way to sue people, nor do I enjoy creating unnecessary drama, but in this case I was pretty pissed. On top of him building his FU fence, he was an absolute douchebag about staining the wood. I mean, it still had the lumber tags and writing marks on it. It honestly looked terrible, but he said that I was not allowed to touch the fence. I gave it one last try before really spending the money on an attorney to talk with him. I know that I don't have the best kept yard in the neighborhood, but I can tell you that this man sure does. One day I looked out a front window and saw him trimming his hedges with a small pair of scissors. So I went to talk to him one last time and he had the biggest sourpuss expression on his face. It was almost comical, but at the time it angered me even more. I tried to explain that I wanted to discuss the fence, to which he responded that the fence was within his legal boundaries and there was nothing to really talk about. When I mentioned the fence taking some of my property and blocking me from the side access of my garage, he only smiled and said that he was just taking the stress of the area off of my hands. When I told him that this was not what I wanted, he literally looked me in the eye and said, "Then sue me." Alright, I guess that tells me exactly what I needed to know. I finally reached out to the attorney I had been speaking with and started the process of suing his old grumpy ass. My lawyer did have me worried at one point during the process of gathering information. It almost looked like he could have a claim to adverse possession of the property because he used it frequently before I bought the home. Apparently he and the old homeowner were buddies or something. But thankfully, once I purchased the home with the established property line, including that area, we were golden. And he's only had possession of it for just over a month. Needless to say, court was simple and he was instructed to remove the fence from my property. Sure, the revenge was good enough there, but I wanted to take it a little further. While we were reviewing the property lines, his new fence was also about 3 inches onto mine. So I asked for the entire fence to be removed instead of just the area by the garage. The judge made a face like, maybe that's a little unnecessary. But it was still my property and she awarded it. It also broke the guidelines for legal fence height, which she agreed with. That weekend, he had a company out and removed the fence professionally, and the following day I started the process of putting up my own. It was definitely an FU fence from me. I made sure to tell him that with the crappy way that I was about him wanting to stain it. At first, I left it unstained and did not care, mostly to piss him off and get revenge for him doing the same to me. But I definitely planned on doing something heinous and ugly stuff with it soon, I just had not decided what yet. That is until my niece inspired me with her drawings. You see, I kept thinking that I needed to go out of my way to make the fence an eyesore to really annoy him. Staining it was not an option, that would look too nice, right? So instead what I did was I had my niece construct me a fun little picture of cute animals and flowers, and I would then convert that to something that I could put on the fence. I'm an artist and love to paint, so this was actually kind of fun for me. The best part was this thing was detailed and took me almost 2 weeks to finish, so he got to watch it the entire time that it was being painted. Some days he would watch me from his back door or kitchen window, and other days he would come outside with his arms crossed and the same sourpuss expression on his face. By the time that I was finished, there were 3 different cats with or without hair bows, several dogs, one being Clifford the big red dog, several birds, frogs and flowers. And you best believe that I did not make these animals the most attractive things. Some of them have to look a little special just for my happy and respectful neighbor to watch when he's angry or stare at them when he is doing yard work. He told me one evening when I was finishing up the fence mural that I was just wasting my time because he was going to paint over it anyway. When I told him, using the exact same words he used on me earlier, that if he touched my new fence with any paint, I would take him back to court and win against him again. Thankfully, that shut him up. Eventually, the paint chipped off after about a year, and I did not want to go out and redo it over again, so he got to witness my beautiful mural of animals as they all fell apart. Surely, that will even be more appealing. And yeah, ripe stars, if you have any neighbors from hell and have ever gotten revenge on any of your neighbors, then I would really appreciate it if you could share your own story either in the comments or on r/ripe stories on Reddit. If you share it on Reddit, there is a very good chance that I will read your story in a future video if you want. In addition, if you haven't already, I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe to the channel because we are super close to 70,000 subscribers. Thank you very much in advance. The next one is titled Fence Malicious Compliance. This is my friend's story from a couple of months ago. Him and his wife just moved into their first house about 6 months ago. Then a strong windstorm came through and damaged their fence. And by damaged their fence, I mean the fence was now leaning slightly, leaning about 70 degrees. Because homeowners insurance won't fix the fence, plus it being winter, my friend and his wife were going to wait until spring to hire someone to fix and replace their fence. Well, their backyard neighbor did not like that. The backyard neighbor wanted the fence fixed ASAP. When the neighbor found out they were going to wait until spring, the neighbor called the city and complained that their fence was out of code. When the city inspector came out to inspect their fence, it was in fact out of code and needed to be corrected. Now, the reason the neighbor was so fixated on the fence being replaced is because the neighbor has a pool in their yard and need to have a fence around their pool for safety. Well, my friend and his wife, now pissed off at their neighbor, decided to only remove the fence and not replace it. This allows them to be in city code, and now when the spring hits, the neighbor is going to need to build a fence on their backside of their yard if they want to fill up their pool for the summer. If the neighbor would have just been nice and not called the city like a Karen, my friend would have built the fence up in the spring, no problem. And the next one is a church drama story, just to mix things up a little bit, and we haven't had these kind of stories in a while. This is the story of how forcing my dad to step down as lead musician caused a mass exodus at our old church and set the catalyst for the disgrace of a once trusted pastor in the community. The story takes place 3 years following the 2008 recession and requires some background. On the edge of an affluent community about 20 minutes south from the country music and hot chicken capital of America stood a small church. And by the way, ripe stars, I suppose the hot chicken capital of America is Nashville? If I'm wrong there, please correct me. Anyway, the church was old and musty and had been unfortunately built on the edge of a creek that had the tendency to rise too much when it rained. In May 2010, a downpour of 3 days, akin to that of Noah's, caused all the rivers, streams and creeks in the middle of the state to flood. The heavy rains trapped people in their homes, caused millions of damage to infrastructure, and consequently disrupted life for everyone. The plot of land where the church had stood was now a lake of dirty water. The city told the church members that they were prohibited from rebuilding, so the property was condemned and declared a flood zone. During this period of time, the city unified and began to rebuild. The church did so too, but the building where we once all congregated was now abandoned. The community held a fundraiser with the hopes of eventually buying or constructing a new church building. We even had matching orange shirts made for the members of the church to emphasize that from the floodwaters we would rise, not the exact phrasing, but you get the gist. I don't recall how much we had fundraised, but it was a lot. During this time, we were holding a service at a neighboring church a few minutes down from our old church building. I want to take the time to say that this neighboring church was a literal embodiment of grace and a reflection of what it means to hold Christian values. This neighboring church took us in and told our congregation that they would let us share the building until we managed to get back on our feet and find a new building of our own. They were empathetic to the pain we had felt in seeing our place of worship destroyed by the floodwaters, as many of them had lost their homes in the floods or seen family members' homes destroyed too. The problem was that in the 2 years following the flood, we never moved out. It became a weekly Sunday routine to drive past our old abandoned church building and waltz right into the building of our neighboring church for service. The members of our own and of the other church had begun asking themselves what had happened to the money that was fundraised. Why hadn't we moved out and gotten our own place? Around this time, my family hit financial hardship. My mom and dad began to slowly tithe less and less until eventually they could not give any more money without the risk that me and my siblings would see a drastic life change. When my parents stopped giving money to the church, the pastor quickly noticed. He asked my parents to open up with him and explain what was going on. My dad told him the truth and told the pastor that for the time being, my family would not be tithing until we were back to financial stability. The pastor did not like this and got his wife to have a talk with my mother. The talk consisted of the pastor's wife PW telling my mom that my mom should cut our cable off and telling my mom to stop eating out to restaurants so that we could pay the church what was owed to God. My mom was furious and tore PW a new one. My mom told her that God knows our family's heart and knows what we were going through and that God does not need the money, He is God. The pastor was offended that my mom had spoken to MP like that, and as a form of retaliation for refusing to pay tithes, he prohibited my dad from playing during church services. The pastor told my dad that my dad was sinning in not paying God what God was owed, and told him that my dad would not be allowed to play as a church musician until our family began paying again. My dad was distraught. Music was his passion, and he always looked forward to expressing his love of God through his musical abilities. Days of not playing during services became weeks, and weeks became months. Eventually, the church members began talking. They began asking my father what was wrong and asking why they did not see him playing during the services. My father is a smart man and would always tell them, "I don't know why I'm not playing. Ask the pastor." Don't underestimate the dedication of nosy church members, because it eventually became the talk of the town, figuratively speaking. The congregation found out that my father was not allowed to play until my family paid. The women's prayer group at the church felt something was up. They began gathering for daily prayer sessions and pushed for a period of fasting in the hopes that God would reveal to them what was happening in the church. This went on for weeks. During one of these prayer and fasting sessions, the group of women said that God had revealed to them that there was a spirit of Jezebel within the church that was controlling the pastor, and the spirit was inhabiting PW. They said that this had to be made known to the rest of the congregation. The women's prayer group decided that the best course of action was to continue to pray and wait for confirmation before they revealed to the church what God had told them. While this was going on, my dad had private phone calls recorded by a friend that was sent to the pastor. The call was of my dad venting about not being able to serve God through his music. This friend, who I will call Judas, was also a church musician and had been speaking to the pastor about receiving a paid position in church as the church music director. Judas had done the pastor a favor by recording the phone call without my dad's consent and letting the pastor hear it. This was my dad's breaking point. My dad had been betrayed by a close friend and humiliated by the fact that he could no longer be a musician at church. As a family, we made the choice to leave and seek better pastures. A few months after our family left the church, the women's prayer group decided to come out with the news of God's revelation for the congregation. What followed was a meeting of senior members of the church and paid church staff, including MS and Judas. I don't know exactly what went down in that room, if the meeting had been part of a coordinated intervention arising from my dad's mistreatment, or if it was God's will, but the senior members began asking questions. They began asking why my father had been made to step down from his position, why he had not gotten a new church building, why we were giving raises to administrators in the church if we could not even afford snacks for the Sunday school kiddos. All types of questions came out that evening. This all climaxed in the justice. It came out that day that all the church money that had been raised for a new building had been spent by the pastor's wife, MS, in buying a new house and funding her real estate business. The new money that came in was being used to pay the pastor, his wife, Judas, and the church accountant, who was the wife of a musician my dad had criticized on his technique, a hefty salary. Apparently, my family was one of the families that tithed the most in the entire congregation, and when my parents stopped giving money, the church's piggy bank began to run dry, and it had become hard to pay the salaries of the pastor, his wife, and his lackeys. This intervention, thanks to the women's prayer group, became viral. Longtime members of the church left in flocks, and the pastor was left with only half of the people he had before. All this happened thanks to the fact that my dad was forced to step down as a musician. And ripe stars, with this we have reached the end of the video. However, if you still cannot get enough of my content, then I would highly suggest to check out my endless binge watch playlist, which will soon show up in the left corner of the screen. In addition, I would really appreciate it if you could not only subscribe to the channel, but also turn on the bell notifications, which you can do by clicking on the little bell icon right next to the subscribe button. This will help my channel tremendously, and this will make sure that you don't miss any of my videos. Furthermore, if you want to see additional ripe content that I don't post on YouTube, then I would suggest to head on over to patreon.com/ripeyoutube for more than 50 50 exclusive videos that you will not see anywhere else. Thank you so much for your amazing daily support, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.